Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. The first slide. As you see, a little bit about my background. I work at a university and have been working on the subject of engineering education for the past several years. In fact, this spring I will be coming up in March. I'll be a T2-day course at ISB on Design College of Excellence. In fact, that's where I connected again with Srikanth. So Srikanth, thanks very much for inviting me to this. And I have a company, a startup called College Builder, which you can check out if you're interested. All right, so this study does is it looks at how the quality of education, particularly focusing on engineering education, has to the governance and finance of the system. I have been undertaking for the last several years with my colleagues at Stanford and other places. So, with colleagues in China and Brazil, India with JB Tilak at NUEPA, and in Russia. But I'm presenting primarily the Indian data with some global comparisons. So, for higher education are in almost every country. They deal with quality, with equity, and with cost. All the BRIC countries and most countries have tried to shift more and more of the cost to the students and their families, and they've done it in various ways. For example, China by raising tuition fees with a largely publicly owned university sector, whereas in India, the state has also relied on the private sector to be an efficient provider of education and to fund education on their side almost entirely with tuition fees. So a private engineering college does not get any subsidies from the state, relies on tuition fees for at least for those students who are unsubsidized. Of course, there are quotas and subsidies for about half the students in any college in India. So what I'm going to show you first are some slides on governance and show how that has affected quality. So unlike most countries around the world, India is fairly unique, what's called a federal university system, which means that the university is an umbrella body, and affected or federated with it are the individual colleges which actually do the teaching. The job of the university is really education, curriculum development, and degrees. The university is owned by the State Ministry for Education. It's not universally the case in India either. So we have a growing trend of unitary institutions, that is, universities that also teach, or facto universities that also teach. And we have those both as a growing category of private universities chartered by state legislation, as universities by public legislation, publicly owned institutions, the most, for example, being centers of excellence like the IITs. And this chart is the governance part. So the Union Ministry of HRD, which is the left small block, controls and manages the unitary institutions like the IITs. And the way it exercises its influence is through Senate membership, appointment of the chancellor or the director or the whatever it's called, give funding. In the middle block, you see the state government, which is primarily what we have in the country in terms of number. And there you have, again, Senate membership, grants, and senior recruitment as ways of managing the system. That way forward to the affiliated public and aided colleges, who make about 70% of the total. It's 28%, and they are run by the trustees. A tiny category of autonomous colleges, which were probably about 10 years ago, but haven't really taken off. Till date, there are only less than 300 such out of over 30,000 colleges. This is the governance structure, and I'll come back to the effect of this on quality. Here, a chart on the growth of higher education institutions. About this is that in the early period you had very high growth. So the Nehru period, 1947 to 1964, largely through public colleges, highly through public colleges, hardly private colleges that came up then. This is interesting because Nehru was largely known for his promotion of the IITs, but he let the state government start whatever institutions they wanted, and it was important to do that. Because it was politically important after so many hundreds of years of colonial rule. There was a pent-up demand, particularly among the middle class and upper middle class elite for access to education. So you had a lot of new institutions coming up, largely you can say semi-urban and the urban areas. Came the Mrs. Indira Gandhi period, sort of roughly coinciding with her rule with some breaks. The growth came down sharply to 10%. And the reason came down is Mrs. Gandhi essentially took the view that universities must teach socially desirable courses like agriculture, and she did not want the university just like mushrooming to teach regular courses in arts and sciences. And all over the whole country, this was possible, and it came down. From 1985 onwards, what I've titled the reform period, you again had a fairly high rate of growth, and high rate of growth in the last decade. And the reason for this is that over time again, the view was desirable in education changed from socially desirable courses to being access for those who are socially underprivileged, such as the poor, the lower caste, and so on. And after 1995, you had this mushrooming growth that came about. The reason for that is that the power to decide on what to do with education shifted from the national government under Mrs. Gandhi back to the state, where constitutionally it belonged. The growth of engineering colleges in particular, and the massive growth, it parallels that of China in its peak. China today graduates every year about twice the number of engineers as India, about 2.8 million. But in recent years, India has been growing much faster. China's growth has come down to about 10% a year now, when they're still growing in engineering at around 25% a year. But interestingly, it's entirely through a growth in the number of colleges, not in the size of each college. Colleges are the engines of growth, and they account for 98% of enrollment. But if you look at average enrollment for college, it's only 500. Much of that is because most of these are new colleges, so they haven't yet reached some scale. But even with scale, after several years, they are unlikely to go beyond 5 or 10,000. And they're somewhat below the economic size of a college. And political decision, the state gives out licenses to those whom it favors, who are politically well connected or the wealthy, and therefore you have many colleges rather than colleges growing to size. Expect that over a period of time, I'm already starting to see this appear, the sustainability of the college will be in doubt, and actually you will see scaling up through consolidation and mergers. The period of reforms, in 1991 you had this era of coalition governments. This shifted power to the states or the provinces. They then created new rules to benefit underprivileged students through quotas and fee subsidies. They wanted to meet their growth targets by allowing private providers because they didn't have the money. So in a sense, they subcontracted out the growth private system. They also, through the federal government, national government's pressure, tried to encourage quality by more autonomy. But the autonomy is unacceptable to private colleges. The trustees run it do not autonomy, not because it will not help their quality. It will, because autonomy actually gives freedom from the university's structures for assessment, for setting curriculum, for disciplinary specialization, and so on, to the trustees. But they worry that under the rules for autonomous colleges, that power has to be shared with faculty, and faculty becomes more powerful than the trustees, and that the trustees' ability to manage the college, control the surpluses, be market sensitive, and so on. national government has gone back to just focusing on centers of excellence. So it's not making any more an effort to have a significant impact in terms of number. It says, okay, we'll do the quality side. There's a lot of debate on that. Academically, it's clear that focusing on a few centers of excellence is going to have an effect on the whole system. Getting back to the issue of outcomes, what's actually emerged is that the private colleges have so far done very well. So even though they are all registered as trusts or societies on a non-profit basis, they have been able to maneuver, in a sense, the state. And it's quite remarkable in our study, which covered Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Kannada, Delhi, Tamil Nadu, the states. We said in each of these places, even after adjusting for the subsidized fees, the total fees that the college received allowed them to earn a fair return on their capital investment of about 15%, which is amazing because you don't see that in any other system in the world. It reflects the pent-up demand in India, plus the immense power of the private college trustees to influence the state to agree to these sorts of tuition levels. And you know, of course, the last bullet on that page, that the private providers are mostly offering education from the point of view of trying to manage surpluses within their system. They use the surpluses to expand on a 25% revenue on the 5% margin on the revenue. And, also, they have to all state strictures on quotas and so on. The private college response has largely been in technical fields, engineering, management, and so on. That table below shows the amazing growth in the institution. Because, you know, you're looking at a system which, say, in 2008, started new colleges every day. When I tell people in the US about that, and then, you know, my colleagues have gone and presented this number in Russia, and they're working with the ministries in China and so on. And in Brazil, they can't believe it, these people in the ministries, saying, my goodness, how is this possible? And you all know how it happened, but it's still quite an amazing number. The problem that quality that I'm going to come to now is that the private colleges, which are, as I mentioned, the engine of growth in engineering, are management-driven, not faculty-driven. They are only required to be faculty-driven in the autonomous colleges, but there are very few of them. But in others, it's very much management-driven, which means that things like management positions, except for the department, are open to everyone. That's the second set of bullets I'm going through. On professional managers occupying positions such as deans of business affairs and development, department viewed as cost centers. All academic work is tightly managed from the top. You can't start a new discipline. Recruitment is tightly controlled. Salaries are tightly controlled. The student viewed as a client rather than take a view that an enlightened education, which is well balanced, can be given. It's very much driven. They are controlled by the umbrella universities as well on this. So now, looking at the impact on quality, you can see what's happening in this chart is the conflicts that have led to poor quality. And I think we need to admit that there's poor quality. You know, you can refer to the NASSCOM McKinsey report of 2 years ago, where it said that 75% of the engineers are unemployable. And I'll show you some more data on that later. Work we have done. You can see quality is really only pushed at the national level, that is the Union Ministry and its unitary institutions. We think quality, but of a certain kind. It's really quality of teaching. They're struggling with this issue of how to research, for example. And even the IIT's research is still fledgling activity and cannot be viewed as being the raison d'etre of the IIT. Most people join IITs really join it to do an undergraduate degree, learn good techniques, and take a job. It's not research-oriented. The dream, of course, is in that middle block, which is where most of the education takes place, where the ministry's goal is not quality. The number one goal is access. For person, they want to set up more and more institutions available in more and more places. For them, that's number one. That also helps achieve the equity goal. Third, they have to manage costs, which they have done by subcontracting the work to the private sector. And quality shows up as number four. That holds and translates to the affiliated public and aided colleges, because control system that runs right through, really bureaucratized setup. The private colleges, they don't accept those goals. Cost management is number one. And this is that, equity and quality take a backseat, particularly quality. And get away with this for a long time because of the pent-up demand. Now, one thing is, over time, one is seeing that the colleges are saying, oh, but we can't continue in this way. Do we now pay some attention to quality? But what they don't realize is how expensive quality is. Now, I calculated that at Stanford University's engineering school, on average, they spend $1 million per professor per year. Even if you take 1/5 that number in India, that's way beyond what the capacity of the private colleges is to spend to achieve good quality. So it's not going to happen in a hurry. And about the regulators which are putting down quality standards, but are actually ineffectual in the sense they cannot disaffiliate even one institution, private college or university. Governance of department, and you see how centralized it is, that you have the dean of academics, and under the dean comes all important work of that push quality, which is fine, except that it's not further decentralized. The vice dean looks after certain aspects, for ARD placement and for academic support, and really the department, which is headed by the HOD, the head of the department, does teaching. That's all they do. You compare with a typical US university, which I show on the next slide, and a lot of these activities which have a direct impact on quality, recruitment, salaries, centers are shifted to the department. The department is entirely responsible for that. And the only way you're going to get quality in the long term, that those who understand recruiting for students or faculty would be able to choose the right quality. In India, in the institution, the principal or the director or the president is involved with the recruitment of every single faculty member, even though he may not know anything about it. I did recently one college in Bangalore, and the principal was busy giving some equipment, some test equipment for a laboratory, and I said, why are you there giving it? He said, because I have to report to the trustees that I've received it in good order. So this is what the principal has to do an effective job. Here you see a sample that just a simple example. I have lots of data, but I thought this one was quite stark. At the same time, about 2 years ago, to the academic dean of engineering at Stanford, Jim Plummer, how do you spend your time between different activities, between administration, between strategic planning, between that is fundraising and academic development, teaching and research. And he said, see, he gave me these numbers, 5%, 30%, 20%, mostly on fundraising, 10% on teaching, and 25% on research. At the time I met someone who's, of course, a friend of mine, Shekhar Gupta. I'm an alumnus of IIM Calcutta. And I said, Shekhar, how do you spend your time? And he said, this I spend it, 85% on admin, 10% on strat planning, and 5% on development. And months ago, he was in Silicon Valley, and I said, you told me this, and this is how it looks. How it changed now? Yes, at 85 has gone up to 95%. So you see, the problems are not really going away in an elite institution of national importance. Now, that shows I bring in some global comparisons here. And here, what I want to show you is that comparing courses, comparing cost and textbooks, discipline choices, recruitment. Look at this. I won't spend too much time on it. What it brings out is something interesting, that, of course, this is the most decentralized. Everything is down pretty much to the department level, if you look at the last column. But China elite with India elite. China doesn't have a big private category yet, so I didn't look at that. But China elite with India elite, and what you see is even China is far more decentralized than India is, and that's within a communist system. There's a lot of work to do. Of course, you look at public in India and the private, the problem is severe because of the role that either the university and the state play or that the trustees play. you're not going to get very good quality coming out of the, for example, in private colleges, the trustees are going to control so much of the activity. Here, course diversity. Here, of course, most of this is mandated by AICTE or whoever the regulator is in India, whereas you have much more flexibility in the other countries. And here you can see that, in compared to the other BRIC countries, India hasn't done a bad job at all. In terms of science and maths, roughly the same percentage of the courses are the same in all the five comparison countries. In engineering fundamentals, you see some similarity. You look at specialization, India is doing quite well. Sciences, of course, the US is a big outlier on social sciences and humanities, and it appears as if, therefore, that they don't get enough engineering education, but that's not the case. I'm going to show you another chart in a moment, within how they still manage to do it all, just putting 42% of the students' time in social science and humanities. And that's really important. It gives such a well-rounded basis to the student when he graduates. And I'll show you some data on well-roundedness in a moment. You see the entering students' data. Often it is said the Indian students train poorly at the school level. When they come out of secondary school, they're not ready for college, and that's the problem. Well, that's not it. These are international tests, TISA, or the Program for International Student Assessment, and TIMS, mathematics and science, which here has been a part of it. It's just beginning in India. But that, of course, China, in its region, it has opened up for testing. Shanghai, it comes out absolutely on top of every single other country. But Brazil is right at the bottom. But Russia and the US are similar, being in the third quartile. And these are international comparisons. We really can't distinguish. I mean, we can say that the students, even from a relatively poor areas like Rajasthan and Orissa, are still on par with Russia and the US. So it's not an entering students problem at all. Here, seeing how the US does it, the first set of rows, like experiments, so shows, based on a survey of 7,000 students in India and also students in the US, how the team is divided up between the students. And this is not much variation whether you look at an IIT level institution or you look at a lower tier institution. 10% of the Indian students' time goes in lectures, 10% in demos, surveying, 9% experiments, so on. But if you compare that with the US, the big difference is 40% on group projects. And the last two rows really brings out how the US does it all, even though they spend so much time on the humanities. The number of class hours per week is roughly the same in India and the US, 30 versus 25. Self-directed work is 13 hours a week in India. And again, this number does not vary much across the type of institutions, the same in the IITs as others, but 40 hours a week in the US. Therefore, these are the upper tier colleges in the US that I looked at, the Stanfords and the Berkeleys. You see the 65 hours a week that they put in the US versus 43 hours a week in India. So you're putting in 50% more time if you're studying in the US rather compared with India. I don't quite understood why President Obama in the US keeps rubbishing the US quality of education. To me, it's really well ahead based on the sort of studies that we have done. That actually, and the evidence is people want to come to the US to study. Drives this also is a group project. You do a lot of homework because you get a lot of group projects. In India, you less homework, you get our textbooks to be back of the book problems to be answered from. So it's not the students' fault. It's very much how the system is designed. You can see quality issues coming up in this slide. That in this data I took out for 2000, and I track this every year as part of my studies of outsourcing. In the services business, if you look at complexity of work, you can roughly divide it into three types: design and consulting, system integration and development. That Indian exports, especially at the low end. It's improved from year 2000 where it was 88%, but even today 77% of the work in India is low end. And the reason is not that the Indian companies don't have the capacity to do high-end work from a management or business model point of view. It's because the quality of the people that they recruit cannot handle a better quality of work. And here another survey which I found also quite telling This based on work that I did, where I asked companies in Silicon Valley to rank engineers that they recruited who had been trained in China, India, and the US in different categories in terms of technical skills, the ability to apply technical skills, project management skills, teamwork, and communication. Here, see, the US consistently ranks right at the top, US trained engineers, and India have their problems. In India, has severe problems in terms of application of concepts, which is key, as you might imagine, for an engineer. Okay, so my last slide, let me summarize by saying that, obviously change is always happening, and the national government is trying things, the state governments are trying things, the private colleges are trying things. The problem I bring out here in presentation are that the system is not well organized. Interesting to ask how the US organizes these conflicts, because they're based everywhere. But India is not well organized. We have this federal university model because unitary institutions are too costly to be replicable. The autonomous college, which could deliver quality, doesn't take off for of trustees in the private colleges and states in the public colleges to give up control. The private colleges are driven by trustees. The public colleges, the elite are striving for the US model and are reaching it somewhere in the teaching level, but not in the research level. And on the right side of the slide, the objectives of stakeholders conflict. Quality is the objective of unitary institutions only. The focus on cost control, access, and equity. The national government doesn't have the political power to drive reform. Growth, therefore, is being driven by the profit motive in private colleges and by access in public colleges. Equity, therefore, remains an elusive objective, but interestingly, access, equity, and cost control are being achieved. You get very cheap price education today. In China, the tuition fee for engineering is about $4,500, so it's double that of the unsubsidized level. But there are certain problems in India. The balance of the cohort is shifting away from well-balanced education to professional education. And the comparison showed that there are problems in the entering cohort of higher secondary students, but value addition is also very